Hello, and welcome to my Frances Hodgson Burnett Author Spotlight video. Growing up, I loved her most well-known works. A Little Princess was life-changing for me. The Secret Garden was always the place that I wanted to go to. Little Lord Fauntleroy and all of the adventures with Cedric's grandfather were just so endearing and heartwarming. But this year, I discovered her adult works and went down a huge rabbit trail after reading The Forgotten Garden by Kate Morton this spring for the Mayflowers read-along, where she just happened to mention that Frances Hodgson Burnett had a bit of a controversial life. And I got so curious, I then found Beyond the Secret Garden by Anne Thwaite, which is a biography, and read and learned about her life. So grab something to drink and join me as we do a bit of a deep dive into her life, her children's works, and my new favorites, adult works. I've got my clipboard here, my trusty clipboard, and I've got notes that I took from the Beyond the Secret Garden biography by Anne Thwaite. With that said, I'm going to just share a bit of the notes that I took from that book. If you want more details, this Beyond the Secret Garden by Anne Thwaite is so thorough and detailed. I just got a few notes that I took from this and things that I gleaned from it that I thought were important to share with you all today. But if you're at all curious, I would highly recommend picking up that book. So she was born in 1845, and 20 years later, she moved from Liverpool, England, to Quebec, Canada. And she ended up at that point heading south and was in Knoxville, Tennessee, of all places. So here she is, having been born in England, and now at 20 is in the United States. She ended up marrying Swan, who was an ophthalmologist. She was an abolitionist, and she honeymooned in New York. And at that point, her life really kind of took off as far as meeting a lot of people. There were so many people she met. She met George MacDonald. When she was in Boston, she met Ralph Waldo Emerson. She met Louisa May Alcott. She was friends with Kate Douglas Wiggins, who is the Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm fame. She also met Emily Dickinson. She met Oscar Wilde. She just was in a circle. I mean, what a time to be alive for in the writing literary world, because she was meeting all kinds of people that, are just incredible. She did travel back and forth a lot between America, Paris, Manchester, and we'll get into that a little more as we move into her adult works. Her marriage, I think, pretty quickly ended up being problematic. She did have two children, two sons, Lionel and Vivian, and we see in this biography that her husband alternately seemed to resent that she was bringing in a lot of income, but then also was putting himself into her business. So he got involved in a lot of the business management aspects while also resenting her for earning more of an income than him. She apparently worked a lot. One of the quotes I wrote down that she wrote herself was, "I wonder if it ever occurs to anyone that it's possible that I should be tired." So she was constantly writing and working. Little Lord Fauntleroy came out in 1886. A lot of people think that she used her own sons as the models for the main character in Little Lord Fauntleroy. There's a lot of nobleness of character in this male character. Little Lord Fauntleroy was quite well received, so much so that other writers started to write plays and scripts based off of this main story of hers. She actually did travel to England and got involved in copyright law because people over there, writers over there, were taking this story and rewriting it into script format. She actually received a diamond bracelet because of her involvement in the copyright law and not allowing it to be plagiarized. And the note that came with the diamond bracelet bracelet was signed with gratitude from British authors. So she was very avant-garde in her changing of the copyright law in England. Just to touch a little bit on the controversies in her life. There were a lot of painful things that happened in Frances Hodgson Burnett's life. Because she was traveling so much and working so hard at earning a living and writing so much, she was pretty estranged from her sons. She didn't see them for like a year at a time. Sometimes she wouldn't be seeing them face to face. They were just writing to each other. So I think that was something that was really challenging in her life. Her marriage really wasn't working, and there is a little bit of controversy around a man named Stephen Townsend who had medical training, and he was just around her a lot. He was starting to act more as her business manager and being involved in her life. There's a lot of supposition around their involvement while she was still married. She did end up in a pony trap accident and ended up with a concussion, and so that was a huge issue for her, where she felt like she couldn't travel after that, and that prevented her from seeing her son. So a lot of difficulty there. She did file for divorce from Swan Burnett in 1898. And she did end up marrying Stephen Townsend, but there's a lot of thought behind that he had blackmailed her and kind of said, listen, if you don't marry me, because then again, you're dealing with, he then has access to her money and everything, that he would then share, that maybe, again, this is supposition, but I think there's a lot of thought behind that this probably was the case, because she really didn't need to marry Stephen. And at that point, their relationship was starting to fall apart as well. But I think the thought is he threatened to share with the world that she maybe had been more involved with him than a married woman during that time should have been. In addition to the pain of not seeing her sons very much, one of them succumbed to tuberculosis, and that was very hard for her. Even though she didn't see her sons, she loved them very much, and that loss, I think, was very awful for her to live through. So we've talked about Little Lord Fauntleroy and how impactful that was to her career. The Secret Garden is obviously a very beloved story. A Little Princess, her own sister Edith, has said that Frances Hodgson Burnett was her own Sarah Crewe. So Sarah Crewe's tendency to tell stories and to engage people through storytelling is a big aspect to Frances Hodgson Burnett, as we know from the stories that we love. And so her, whole writing of Sarah Crewe probably had something to do with her love of storytelling. So I found this Frances Hodgson Burnett complete works on Kindle for a pretty reasonable price. I feel like it was just a few dollars. And this has all of her works on it, all of them, that you can read and access. So, and this combines both her children's works that are very well known as well as her adult works. So, if you're interested in reading more of her works, I would recommend the Kindle version. It makes them very accessible, and you can go to the table of contents and click on each story, and then it will, that will be what you read, and then you can go back out, so you're not getting lost in different stories and different pages. So I think the complete works on Kindle is a really great place to start if you are interested in reading something more than The Secret Garden, A Little Princess, and Little Lord Fauntleroy. So the first adult book of hers that I read was The Making of the Marchioness. About the making of the Marchioness, Frances Burgess wrote, "This is such a dear thing. I can't tell you how I enjoyed writing it. It is a picture of a nice, simple, sweet, prosaic soul who arrives at a good fortune, almost comic, because it is in a sense so incongruous. Its heroine is a sort of Cinderella, a solid, kind, unselfish creature with big feet instead of little ones. Her name is Emily Fox-Seton, and I absolutely love her, as you will. The cleverness of the thing, I know it is clever, lies in the studies of character and the way in which the most wildly romantic situation is made compatible with perfectly everyday and unromantic people and things. So it is in her complete works as Emily Fox-Seton, and this says being The Making of the Marchioness and The Methods of Lady Walderhurst. This is 2 books that have been bound together, printed as one. And in this, we do follow Emily Fox-Seton. The 2 books, in my opinion, are so vastly different from each other in tone. The first book is, I think, pretty heartwarming and cozy. We have an example of a young lady who she's gentry but doesn't have income or a family name behind her, and so she has to work, which I think was a pretty common situation for a lot of women. And so she ends up acting as a companion during a summer period to help kind of with party planning and having people coming to visit. And through that, we meet a lot of different characters, and there ends up being a love interest. And it's actually a pretty short story, I think, and really pleasant. The second part of this, which is The Making of Lady Walderhurst, is quite dark, in my opinion. There's danger, there's attempts being made on people's lives. When the book ends, you're not quite sure if someone has done something intentionally to injure someone else. You're kind of left thinking like, oh, it just seems like that is the route that we're going on. It's not spelled out, but it's very much inferred. And so really fantastic, I think, breadth of work. The first one feels, while it is heartwarming and cozying, it feels a little bit less fleshed out. And the second one, I think we get so far down in the details, whereas the second one feels more fleshed out, I think. So I really enjoyed reading The Making of the Marchioness, so much so that I decided that I wanted to read another Frances Hodgson Burnett. And someone, I think it was Jacqueline in the group that I read The Making of the Marchioness in, mentioned The Shuttle. So I went on Pango and I found this stunning copy of The Shuttle and started to actually listen to it on LibriVox because I wanted to take care with this copy. And so I started to listen to it on LibriVox. And I was enthralled from the get-go. This book is incredible. And reading in the Beyond the Secret Garden biography, this book gave her so much trouble. I'm going to read to you what it is that the author wrote about the shuttle in a couple different places so that you can kind of get a feel for how troublesome this book was. She put a great deal of her own experience into describing the unhappy marriage in the shuttle. The Shuttle is the story of an Anglo-American marriage. It was very much a story of the time. In 1909, it was to be estimated that more than 500 American women had married titled foreigners, and some $220 million had gone with them to Europe. The most publicized, the most commercial perhaps, of all these marriages was that of the reluctant Consuelo Vanderbilt in November 1895 to the Duke of Marlborough. It was no coincidence that the American heiress in Frances's novel was called Rosalie Vanderpool. At times it seemed it must all be a dream, one of those nightmare things, she described in The Shuttle, in which you suddenly find yourself married to someone you cannot bear, and you don't know how it happened, because you yourself have had nothing to do with the matter. Frances turned back once again to The Shuttle. She had begun it in the summer of 1900, and it was not finally finished until the autumn of 1906. This book was a real labor to her. The pen-driving machine refused to function in its usual smooth professional way. The material, that fresh, unused material she had been urged to acquire as long ago as 1889, was intractable. The struggles continued right to the end. "I've been thinking of nothing but the book," she wrote in August of 1906, "which has not been rushing headlong as sanguine Vivian thinks." It has definitely hung back because it knows it ought to be finished by September. It simply holds on to each obstacle as it's dragged past and screams and kicks up its heels and tries to dig its toes into the ground at the same time. That is difficult, of course, but it is devil enough to accomplish it. For one thing, you see, it knows it can't have as much room as it wants because it has to be serialized. And if I gave it all the room it wanted, the century would be brimming over. But, grinding my teeth, I push it along, holding on to its collar and kicking it on the shin at intervals. Frances was able to joke about it, but part of the problem back in 1903 was that so much of the material was too near the knuckle. Sir Nigel Anstruthers was Stephen, writ large, distorted, exaggerated, but still Stephen. And as Frances described Rosalie's sufferings, so different from her own, as Rosalie was so different, but so imaginable, her pen faltered. She was glad of any excuse to put the shuttle down and turn to other things. Something else that I learned in that biography was that, as we learned earlier, Frances Hodgson Burnett very much traveled between England and America and Paris. She made 33 Atlantic crossings, and the shuttle refers to the steamship that would transport people from the United States back over to Europe. And so I loved how she incorporated the shuttle, the steamer ship, and that experience in this book, and also, all of the ramifications of people traveling as well as purposes behind people traveling to, across the Atlantic in this book. And I thought that adding that personal experience was so indicative of her writing style, just like she added personal experience in Little Lord Fauntleroy and added personal experience in A Little Princess. I just think that that is where she really shines in her writing style. So the shuttle is very complex because, as we've learned, this did kind of mirror the relationships that she was in, which caused her difficulty in writing it. It is quite heavy in its content. It very much is an exposition of marital abuse, gaslighting, and manipulation, and when someone is taken away from their family and abused and then has no recourse or way out to be able to share that this abuse is occurring. But the thing that I love that we also see in her other works, in all of them, is a thread of hope and redemption and of family coming back to check in and to help and to get involved. And I do love the thread of hope and the happily ever after kind of endings that we experience where things get resolved. Sometimes it gets resolved in kind of scary ways, but it does get resolved. And there is this very intense scene at the end of the shuttle where when you're reading it, you are breathing hard. You're like, would not want to read it, honestly, when the power has gone out and you're in the dark. It's very creepy. This book has such a broad skill level in it, I think, of writing about trauma and post-traumatic stress and abuse, as well as familial love, as well as romance. And we get this whole political discussion of American heiresses marrying landed gentry in England and what was going on there, as well as village life and the wealthier landowner comparison. We also get a lot of the class levels on the steamer ship of, your ability to be able to have money and stay in certain places on a ship versus the people who don't have as much money and how they're more in like a cargo hold type area. It covers all of that. So I could go on and on about the shuttle, but I did want to at least give you a synopsis of Frances Hodgson Burnett's life and kind of what was going on in her life that made her such a controversial figure, and also hopefully open up your exposure to her writing like mine was outside of A Little Princess and The Secret Garden, because I think nowadays they are so popular, and rightly so, but there is more out there that she's written that I also think deserves recognition. So let me know, have you read her children's works? Have you also read Little Lord Fauntleroy? And then let me know if you have read her adult works, which ones you love. And if you haven't, let me know if any of these that we have talked about today seem intriguing to you. So thanks you guys for joining me on this literary rabbit trail that I am bringing you guys along with me on. And as always, thanks so much for watching, and until next time.